Welcome back, and we are starting chapter 16 today. So chapter 16 is going to focus on exponents and their properties. And this is going to be something that we really need to get and understand so that we are ready for algebra next year. So we're going to look at a couple different properties of exponents. We're going to start just by making sure we know what exponents are, and then we'll go on from there. So I know we've used exponents in this class before, but it's also important that we know the vocabulary. So when we're looking at a number that has an exponent, the number that's being repeatedly multiplied, so in this case the 2, that's called the base. And then the exponent is actually the smaller number above, and that tells us how many times to multiply. So for example, 2 to the 7th power means 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. There would be 7 2's being multiplied here. So that is important that we understand that. And when we get the answer, when we do all that multiplication, that answer is called a power. So that's important for us to know as well. Okay, so we're just going to look at some really basic examples here of repeated multiplication. So this step right here, this is called the repeated multiplication, where we have 4 times 4 times 4 times 4. That's called repeated multiplication. Okay, and then when we get our answer, this right here, this is exponential form. So we look at what number is being multiplied, 4, that becomes our base, and then we count how many times or how many 4's are we multiplying, and that becomes our exponent, so 4 to the 4th power. Now, when we look at example B, we have these negatives, and notice that the negative is inside the parentheses. That is critical, that we put the negative inside the parentheses. That tells us that the negative is also being repeated. That's different than if I had written, let's say, negative 6 to the 3rd power. Negative 6 to the 3rd power would mean that only the 6 is being repeated. So that would be 6 times 6 times 6. And then the negative in front actually means that once I get my answer, I'm multiplying the entire expression times the negative, or times negative 1. So this is a common problem that we really want to make sure we understand and that we're correctly using parentheses with our negatives. Okay, so in our next problem, we notice that we have both numbers and variables being combined here. And so we want to write this in exponential form. Exponential form just means we're going to leave everything as an exponent. So what we'd first want to do is we'd want to look at our numbers that are being multiplied, and we have 5, that's our base, and it's being multiplied 2 times, so that we would have 5 to the 2nd power. Then we would look at our variable parts, and we've got d being multiplied, so we would have d, and we would count how many d's there are, and there are 4, so d to the 4th power. Now we don't need any kind of operation in between those. By just writing them next to each other, we know that that means multiplication. So we would simply, in exponential form, leave this as 5 to the 2nd power, d to the 4th. Again, I really want to emphasize this is called exponential form. Okay, so let's take a look at the difference between exponential form and actually simplifying a problem all the way. So when the directions tell us to simplify, that means that we're going to do everything that we can do. So that would actually be multiplying the problem out. So in this case, 3 to the 5th power, that would mean 3 times 3 times 3. And we would physically multiply that out. So 3 times 3 is 9, and 9 times 3 is 27. Same thing works for the fraction. So for example B, this would be 1/3 times 1/3 times 1/3. So we would end up with 1/9 times 1/3 is 1/27. Now I do want to point out those parentheses again. So notice how we had the fraction inside parentheses. That is important. If the parentheses had not been there, if it had said 1/3 to the third power, then that would mean the exponent only applied to the 1. So that would be the same as in our numerator, 1 times 1 times 1 over 3, which is a very different answer. That would be 1/3. So we want to be really, really clear that we're using our parentheses appropriately. So if it has parentheses, that means everything inside of those parentheses is being repeated. If it does not have parentheses, only what the exponent is touching is being repeated. So this is important. Now here's an example that really focuses on that. So because we see that the negative is included in the parentheses, this is -4 times -4, and sometimes people like to continue the parentheses to be more clear, times -4 times -4. So -4 times -4 is 16, and 16 times 16 is 256. Now that's different than the next problem. This next problem is 2 being repeated, not the negative. So this is 2 times 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 2, 8 of them. And then after we do all of that multiplication, we're multiplying the entire expression by -1. So we would start multiplying. 2 times 2 is 4, and I like to group them. 4 times 4 is 16. 16 times 16, oh, I'm going to run out of space here, is 256, and then at the very end, I'm multiplying that by -1, so I'm actually getting -256. So we have to be really, really careful with those negatives to make sure that we're doing that correctly and we're not making a negative mistake.